Hello, and welcome to the Happiness Index podcast. My name is Stefan Tornquist. I'm the Managing Director of Executive Summary Research and the writer of the Global Workplace Happiness Report. I'm borrowing the host chair from Matt Phelan for a couple of months to speak with the academics and experts who are contributing to the project. I'm in Brooklyn, New York. It is getting to be late January. It's very cold, but I'm very excited to speak with our guest today, Dr. Anne Hsu, who has contributed an essay about personal growth in the workplace. Anne is a lecturer in computer science and psychology at Queen Mary, University of London. A lot of other things as well, and we'll hear about some of those, I hope. For our American listeners, a lecturer is essentially an associate professor. Do I have that right, Anne? Well, thank you for joining us. Tell us where you are and a little bit about yourself.
I'm in London, and so I'm as well as in my academic role at Queen Mary. I do for the research. I also do workshops and coaching around resilience, motivation, and personal growth to help people through challenges at work.
Great. That is very succinct. We get a lot of variation, and when you ask somebody, tell us a little bit about yourself. So why don't we start broad? What do you think about personal growth in the workplace? Like, how do you define it? What might we get wrong when we think about it?
I guess I think of it as personal growth as in any domain of life. The way it goes wrong is pretty much it can be seen as too narrow, right? I guess sometimes people just think it's just the skills like learning a new programming language or learning a new very work domain focused thing. But really a personal growth is something that's personal. So it's requires calls someone to like look into what's resonant for them of how they'd like to expand as an individual in terms of how they can show up in the world, how they can meet a moment, how can they, become more flexible and adaptable. And so it's actually a very personal thing, but it requires someone to have like connect to a bigger vision of what they can be. And the other thing is like a very famous, famous humanist psychologist Carl Rogers has said, what is the most personal is the most universal. It's quite a famous quote. And so I think when we dig into personal growth and we get to really the bottom of what something we care about in terms of like self-expansion, there's something so universal about that as well. Like even though different people might highlight different values or different strands or different expressions of personal growth, if we're really getting to something essential, then it's really something that is everyone can relate to and everyone around us can benefit from as well.
Well, so if I heard you right, personal growth from the outside is sort of universal. The strands that make it up are universal, whether you're in a personal or professional domain. Coming from the other side, I don't think not everybody sees personal growth in the workplace universally. You use a phrase, and I'll paraphrase, and won't get it. It won't be nearly as lovely. You describe work for some as a Faustian bargain, like a compensated obstacle to personal growth. Obviously, that varies a lot. But do you have a sense that the zeitgeist around work has really changed in recent years as a result of the pandemic? I mean, there's a lot of discussion of sort of generational views of work, and I don't know how seriously to take some of those because they're very often sort of pop psychology takes on oh, well, this generation is different from that generation. What's your sense on do we see work as a place for personal growth, and are there differences by generation or type of work?
Yeah, I mean, I have to look at exact studies, but I do think that there's differences in expectations, and of course in generations, people never even thought about work as a place for personal growth in the old times, right? Work was a place you show up, you do your duty, you have your sense of like what you need to do in times when society had much more, one job for life, a very different structure in terms of roles, not just at work, but in society as large, it wasn't as much variety in how life and work could look. So, and there's pros and cons to that. I mean, it is more restrictive in some ways, but then there's just a clear thing like work is work. We all have to do this. And then work became something that could promise meaning, and it became this idea of something that links to our identity, links to who we are, and links. And then so when that like promise is made, I think it's almost similar in advertising. There was a time when clothes were just like clothes, and they were supposed to be long wearing, And I think it was like at the turn of the century, all of a sudden this idea that clothes could express our personality and be something about like, who we are in the world. And I think there's that shift about work as well, like now is there's this for so many it can be some part of our personality, our identity, our sense of self-worth is wrapped up in work. And so then there was that promise, and then of course, there's work requires like, contributing the organization's needs, and then you have this person wanting them to like want it to somehow satisfy these personal identity needs. So yeah, there's going to be a conflict. And so I think, yeah, so then there's been a shift again, it seems, right, that in terms of people I talk to, there's more like not wanting to just accept, a standard way of working, or more demand that, that life has more. And maybe if work doesn't satisfy that or mirror that, then people feel more disgruntled. So yeah, there's a higher standard in a way for what people are kind of expecting, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is something there, and certainly here in the States, there's a stereotype around younger workers being more disengaged from work, and certainly people my age can be counted on to complain about younger workers, which is probably just a new version of like, oh, kids and their music these days. And I'm not sure that I see the same. I might see some of the same things, but I don't know that I agree on. Oh, they just don't care about work. I don't think that's true at all. I think they want to care about work and might
Mhm.
have different expectations around work that maybe work isn't satisfying. But I don't see a disengaged generation at all. Um, so here in the States, certainly, I don't want to speak for any other, I don't want to overgeneralize for any other countries, but workers are certainly can be seen as productivity machines. Right. I think especially now as some leaders are starting to like look at AI versus human workers for, some functions, if not full replacement. Um, there's some very calculations being assessed anyway. And here that's kind of baked into our self-definition to a point, like how productive am I? That's not necessarily a bad thing, but in your essay, you talk about people at work are still fully fledged human beings. What does it do to your psyche when there's a disconnect between, sort of what you need and what you're getting?
Yeah, it boils down to something really fundamental, which is like in terms of our like brain state or mental state, you can think of like here, what's relevant here is like kind of two modes of mental state. One is where our brain is kind of in a more tight and reactive mode. In the extreme case, you see it as like more threatened mode. And it doesn't mean like we're literally threatened, but the sense of not getting our needs met in any sense, whether it's social, not just like physical safety, and in evolutionary terms, it was like evolved for us to our threat response evolved for us to be monitoring our physical safety and survival safety. But now just any social safety, motivation safety, any sense of meaning safety, if we feel that we're lacking that, we will also our mind will go into this tight, not responsive mode, but a more reactive mode, right? So something more shut down. So something equivalent to fight, flight, freeze, but we can become just, shut down, not responsive, disengaged, right? So these are kind of versions of withdrawing if we're being more reactive, and then that's like more like fight, but then otherwise freeze and withdrawal. So that's what happens. The brain shuts down, and we're not in this when we do feel safe, when we're in the opposite, when we're not in this threatened tight mode. Threatened is such a big word, right? But it means it's what happens when our needs don't get met, even at small levels. Even when just someone walks in and looks cold, then all of a sudden this like big threat alarm goes off, right? And so it can. And so in contrast to that, if we're in like a safe, flexible mode, that's when we grow. That's when we're creative. That's when we can see the big picture and the small picture. That's when we can zoom our attention, right? Attention is flexible. We can, focus and, rise to the occasion and meet a challenge. And then we like come back and relax and then see the bigger picture, and we're creative and we're engaged and motivated, right? So that's the state. So I guess that's the cost is that we're not actually in that state. We're going to end up with people who are not in that state where they're actually like connecting to most of their capacities.
Yes. What's interesting, I was part of an organization a while back that was going through sort of the pieces were being carved off and sold. And it was a very public process with which everybody was familiar. And leaving aside how the organization chose to communicate and handle it, it was interesting to see because everyone certainly did feel a sense of threat, even at fairly senior levels. And so there's sort of two axes. One is how do you individually, how do you, Anne, respond to threat, right? It could be fight,
Mhm.
flight, et cetera. And then there's that organizational component because, if you can make you feel safe, then you can fight together. I'm
Yes.
assuming that fight is the best of these outcomes, at least, in this framework. But without the organization taking a proactive role or doing the things that could have been done to make people feel, if not safe, at least sort of informed. Because
Yeah.
clarity and you know, it's one, waiting for a train and knowing it's late, but not knowing when it's going to arrive versus it's late, but it's 20 minutes late. There's such a visceral difference in the not
Absolutely.
knowing.
Yes. Yeah.
And so people were sort of left to their own devices. And I saw, those three behaviors, fight, fight, and freeze. And then, there's the discussion of fawn as a
Mhm.
fourth
Mhm.
response.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
another one that you did see people some people sort of really going to the letter of their job descriptions and really working hard and trying
Mhm.
to placate the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was fascinating, which probably sounds a bit bloodless, but what are you going to do besides observe? So sorry for that sidetrack there. In the study that we've got in the field for the happiness report, we look at personal growth through three dimensions, which of course is not enough dimensions, but you can't have all the dimensions all the time. So I thought we'd go through those as sort of a jumping off point to talk about personal growth, at least through this lens. So the first of these is how satisfied are you with the learning opportunities that are offered at your organization? And I think I've certainly been part of companies where that was how personal growth was viewed. Hey, we've got some online training, or we bring in, personal growth. And certainly it's a part of it. When does it work? Because I've certainly also seen learning just sit there on offer, not get used, not really, people say it's very important, but then don't necessarily take advantage of it. Is it just being there? Can that add to your sense of at least opportunity to learn?
I think it can. I mean, I think it's also highlighting that it's useful, as in, like, I've had friends talk about training things they've had at work, and they thought they were really great.
Absolutely. They can. Hey,
So excellent, and an opportunity to get something for free, that otherwise you might that really does give so much personal growth, whether it's assertiveness training or, any kind of like workshop leading training, and all these things, right? These are skills that you bring into so many your future, both in work and outside of work. I guess having just people champion it. I mean, that's a big thing with learning programs, right? It's there's almost like a campaign that needs to
yes,
happen
that's exactly
around
right.
them. Yeah, I think that's important, and also highlighting that it is here not just for this a narrow reason, but that, here's opportunities to expand, like.
I think that's right. And it's interesting. The two examples you mentioned are both what people in the learning world will call soft skills, which everyone says, oh, it's so important to develop critical thinking, negotiate, but the companies rarely spend money in soft skills beyond sort of here's some online stuff that you could consume. And, certainly post pandemic, it's much more difficult to get people to, oh, you know how I want to spend the next hour on, a packaged set of videos. And I think a lot of companies probably tend towards we offer training. It's in a programming language. It's how to use Salesforce better. It's tangible and useful,
Mm.
but not in that soft skills domain, which is very often when, if you have an on-site training with somebody who's really good, who's talking about one of these universal human skills or, sort of the other side of a human desire, to be something more. That's when you have people say, typically, that was amazing. That really made a difference, and they're more likely to carry it forward into their jobs. And then, of course, there's that's how we think about learning. But then there's the mentorship and interaction and relate. I mean, I think most the I don't know if this is scientifically backed, but the benchmark was sort of, people will learn 10% from formal learning, and then the other 90% is a major part of that is simply interaction and informal learning, which of course gets into relationship and other variables. But that's so hard to measure. I think probably the questions around, do you find, do you collaborate well with your team, are probably a better indicator of whether you get that kind of mentorship than a question about learning opportunities, which might feel more defined and narrow. All right. So another question is, and how satisfied are you with the opportunity to progress your career? And I think I can't speak to a global benchmark, but historically, that has been one of the lowest scoring answers. Sort of makes sense, right? There are only so many places to go in a typical organization. How do you, and also I don't think companies are great at sort of communicating how one might grow. It varies a lot. Some are super at it. When you work, as an advisor, is that part of what you might advise a company about, sort of how to structure at least the communications around career progress?
Yeah, I mean, I have had those discussions. I mean, I think it's really requires the company to know. Like sometimes, an individual might not be as aware of all the possibilities that can happen. So, and a lot of times it's also just talking to the individual for them to ask the questions or seek, to talk to more people to see like what are all the ways that they could, go on ahead. So it's
Hmm.
kind of like a information seeking.
Yeah. So often things come back to clarity with an organization. And it's tough to think, it requires a kind of organizational empathy. Like,
Mhm.
what is it like to be at this level in our company, at that level? And it's not easy.
No, yeah, and it's a lot of people, yeah.
Formalizing that is quite
Yes.
difficult. I had a chat with, there's sort of the two groups of people when it comes to AI. This is fine, but it's deeply flawed. And then there are this is amazing and it's only going to get more amazing. And it's actually a psychologist who's advising an AI company out in Silicon Valley that's building, God help us, a AI psychologist. But she was talking about how AI offers this possibility of actually understanding people in your organization much better than you do now,
Mhm.
because an AI actually can process all of the emails, all of the chats, the career history, and sort of do some of the empathizing for us.
Yes, yes, and especially for career opportunities, yeah, there's empathy and there's also just information, like
Yeah.
there and then there's just so many branches. I think that's what makes it challenging because people's trajectories are quite individual these days. It's not like just a few fixed trajectories. There's so many, which is what makes the communication more difficult. And so, yeah, I think that's an excellent use for AI as a career coach because it's a matter of like mapping past trajectories, looking at other people's past trajectories and where other people have gone and just linking that information. That's a very clear, like,
Yeah, a career coach for the individual and then potentially for the manager as well.
yes.
We're not all wired to understand other people's motivations. Some
Oh, yeah,
people
yeah,
are,
and from the
some people aren't.
motivational perspective as well. Yes, yeah, no, he's
What
very
is it
good
that
at that.
makes Anne tick?
Yeah.
I might have no idea, even after several years of working together. I might have like, well, this is what's important to people at work, and actually what's important to you is over here. Or simply the apprehension of, did you know that Anne's been here and knocking her evaluations out of the park, but she's been at the same level for 4.5 years. You've got to address this in some way. You can imagine a system, I mean, a deeply intrusive system, but a system that could actually be quite helpful
Right,
in,
right, that helps surface the questions, right? Or surface
yeah,
the themes and yeah, no, absolutely,
yeah,
yeah.
not automating it all,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
enabling it.
Exactly, yeah, yeah.
Uh, all right. So the last question around personal growth in the survey is around challenge. How satisfied are you with the amount of challenge in your role? And it's a great question, and it's something that we all, I think most of us think about internally, but it's not something that I've encountered at many organizations. Are they thinking about that? So do you want to define challenge in the role for us, and then we'll
I mean, how I define it or how did people interpret it when they answered the survey?
maybe, but well, we don't need to worry about people's interpretations. How do you define it?
Yeah. Um, gosh, I mean, that's again just like that personal question, right? But a lot of times challenge see, that's the problem, like, someone will view challenge according to their ideas of what they want a task to be or what they want to be growing in, right? And oftentimes the challenge of a task may not match the direction that the person's, thinking of being challenging. Yeah, so I mean, when people feel challenged, it's like this is a slight tangent, but there's this quote from Skinner, the famous psychologist, who said, like, freedom is the illusion we feel when we're going after what we want. And so in a way, there's something like challenge. It's maybe that's like the feeling, the positive challenge is this like experience when we're growing and just at the edge of our capabilities, but not too much, not too little, in the direction that we want. And that's when you're satisfied with challenge. And if it's like too much, then maybe we get frustrated or, and if it's too little, then we're bored. But then if it's in the wrong direction and we're not really thinking of that as a direction we want to be challenged in, we also just think that's annoying and that's not satisfying either, right? So in a way, it's also helping people expand their idea of what's a meaningful challenge and then also positioning it so that it's something they can do that stretches them, but not too much, not too little.
Yeah, it strikes me that, if I were running HR and I got this, data back, like, well, people aren't feeling challenged enough, or they're feeling too challenged, that would be a difficult one to act on, I think.
I think that the details, it's like exactly what do they mean when they answered that, right? Like,
Right.
was it like they don't have the information? I mean, some challenges where you just like, I don't have the information, I don't have the authority to, like make this decision, and yet I have to like do something about it, and I'm like in this like stuck in this impossible situation. That's a unsatisfying challenge.
Right. You could be dissatisfied with the amount of challenge because it's too great, not
Yeah,
because
or not feasible, right? Like feels
right. I
unfair,
mean,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm being presented with these problems that I cannot solve, or at least it takes so many other collaborators to solve them that it's
Yeah, yeah, and it could be like a meaningless challenge, like, "Oh, I'm only dealing with this challenge because something's so poorly, like, organized or not set up, in an efficient way. I'm only dealing with this challenge because, someone else is doing something in an annoying, inefficient way." So there's so many ways to be unsatisfied with challenge. I guess it's like the whole there's a quote, I don't know if it's actually accurate, but that Anna Karenina, I think, quote, like, "All happy families have similarities, but unhappy
but
families."
yeah, it's not unhappy, but yeah, are unique or are different.
Yeah, different, yeah, and so I think being dissatisfied with the amount of challenge is probably very unique, like, there's
That's right. Well,
very
fortunately, in the study, every question has a qualitative
perfect,
opportunity for an open text
okay.
response, and because people are, this isn't a survey of sort of a Gen Pop. It's within HR platforms. So the 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 share of people contributing unsolicited open text or semi-solicited open text responses is pretty high.
Great,
So it'll be
okay.
interesting to
Yeah,
look
yeah,
at
I
the
mean, I think
nuance.
that's where
Because
the rich
otherwise, it sounds like we're going to need 8 questions to narrow in on challenge.
I think with these questions, yeah, I think definitely the details, the qualitative details would be key to, like,
Yeah,
fleshing
I
out.
mean, they certainly will be in all of these because, we're not asking, do you use a technology or not use it? We're asking, how do you feel? Like, well, what do you mean? How do
Yeah,
I
yeah, they're
feel?
very multidimensional
Right.
questions.
So in your essay, you talked about how growth appeals. Appeals isn't quite the right word, but to intrinsically motivated people. Do our intrinsic motivations, don't they ebb and flow? Like they're gonna vary over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
The Like I did a lot of research around learning at one point, and I mean, this is a case maybe where they don't ebb and flow so much, but there seemed to be a share of people that were just intrinsically motivated learners.
Mhm.
They loved having opportunities to learn. They were going to go and find them. You
Yeah,
didn't need to
yeah.
build a program to let them know that. Yeah,
Learning is their thing. They will make their learning for themselves.
right. We were working with companies trying to get people to learn. Like, well, we don't even need to worry about, you just need to have stuff for them to learn. But is having a purpose the way that an organization can sort of get at people's individuals' motivations? Like, if you have a purpose that aligns with the workforce, that's how we can key into their motivations. What do you do?
I think intrinsic motivation has to come from maybe more the individual relationship level with the manager or the person that can
Hmm.
talk to each employee. And this is in where that, because intrinsic is so personal, and right? It's so linked to, and so what's motivating to one person, like they want to become, write really elegant reports, really elegant code. Another person wants to be a really good networker and be able to present well. And there's so much research on like attention and the ability to deploy our attention toward pictures in our head that are motivating, right? So motivation comes from this, like our ability to envision something that will feel satisfying. And there's like all the work on motivational psychology. There's so much of this, like you don't just set a goal, you're like contrasting this picture of how amazing you're going to feel when you have these capabilities, when you've like achieved this thing, and you flesh out that picture in vivid detail. And then you have to understand, well, what are your obstacles that get in the way? And intrinsic motivation is like when the balance of like, okay, the reward feels salivatingly real, it's not just this abstract thing, but it's like, I will feel so good when I can do that kind of thing. And then at the same time, you have a good understanding of, okay, and these are the obstacles in the way, and I know how to grow and or overcome these obstacles because I have a plan. So very detailed. So there's the strategic level, there's the overall big goal level, the strategy level, which is slightly underneath it, and then there's the tactical level of actually being able to implement towards day to day, right? Because you can have like, oh, it'd be so amazing to give this great big presentation to this client, and then like, and you don't know how to get there because you can't organize the stuff, you don't know how to make get all the feedback you need from everyone you need to talk to, right? So there's all the detailed tactical things that you need to do and have those be clear enough. So intrinsic motivation is again related to that thing of things being not too hard, but just hard enough,
Hmm.
right? That's what makes game designer. It's literally like being a game designer. You have to like tune this thing so that people find the goal really worthwhile and they're like excited because the vision in their head is clear and bright. And then at the same time, like getting the level just right at each stage of the task so that it's just the right amount of challenge.
Yeah. And I wonder whether the individual you've just described sounds quite evolved to me. And I mean, of course, all of us do bits and pieces of that, but they might be more feeling than thought.
Hmm.
And sort of taking it through, a real analysis of what are my intrinsic motivations, and as opposed to like, well, in general, I like people, and in general, I like, um, and I don't know whether there's a role for the organization in trying to help people go
Yeah.
through a process of like, let's figure out, you have some, you can state your broad goals, perhaps. Although I could say that early career, it was, uh, I was a pinball that was just sort of opportunities emerged and I found myself doing them, and they were new and different. So did they connect to my intrinsic motivations? I guess so, but I did not go through a more formal process until much later in my work life.
I think there's a big role for storytelling here. I once did a pilot study on having people discuss what they found motivating, intrinsically motivation in very, very different jobs. And it was like the most beautiful stories came out, like even from like very different like lines of work and not like norm office jobs, like someone just at the checkout counter. They were like, oh, I just like, being able to say just the right amount of conversation so that the line keeps flowing, that nothing gets, stalled, but then that someone's like eyes light up. And someone else was dealing with stock
They
instead
are
of
the bartenders of the retail world.
yeah, they are right. And someone was like, "Oh, I just love seeing all the new products we have and then like organizing them in a way where they were just so fascinated with how all the products were organized." And so I think if you actually have stories from people who really enjoy a certain task, a certain job, and have them share what they're paying attention to and what they're getting satisfaction out of, that's
It's
something
so
that,
interesting.
yeah, can really like ignite the imagination of other people who didn't even think to appreciate that. Maybe that's not their favorite thing, but like, oh, I can notice that and see how that can be.
Well, and even if you took quite a cynical view at sort of how managers and organizations see their employees, you would learn so much from that exercise. Even if you never used it to help the people on the floor out there, you would learn so much about your own company, products, ways of working, physical
Oh,
spaces,
yeah,
non-physical
yeah,
spaces.
yeah, and what's
Um,
exactly, yeah, yeah.
it's like a sliver of ethnography,
Yes.
but in a much more sort of you could do such an exercise much more quickly than, in proper ethnography is a killer.
Okay, yeah, it's not no one wants to do proper
So
exactly.
expensive.
Well, unless you have to, because 'cause you're an academic, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, no, and I think it's just it'd be like it's fun too, right? Because people could really, really
Yeah.
enjoy sharing the details of it, and I think that's the thing, it's just, like, looking for more precision in when you're asking these questions, like, what are you paying attention to? What is that moment that's satisfying? Encouraging people to take the time to even just check, like, "That felt good." And how do I make that happen more often when I do this thing in this way with attention to quality in this dimension, this satisfying thing happens more often. And when you talk about that 10,000 hours stuff, and it's just so often the 10,000 hours were mentioning that they overlook the importance of deliberate feedback, right? Because that's what actually,
Right. You can absolutely like you can spend 10,000 hours
yeah,
and
go nowhere, not improve. Yeah, and not be an expert. Whereas like getting and growing and getting, better skills in whatever way comes from this deliberate feedback. And part of this detail allows you to also know what feedback to look out for, right? If someone's looking for really a certain type of organization of the shelves of products that make someone feel a certain way, then the feedback is like, oh, but when customers come and they're stuck and that's something that we need to look for, that they look stuck, they look confused versus they're wandering through the aisles and they're looking so, happy or whatever. In a software team, it's like if you're creating the tickets and then it's going smoothly or someone's getting stuck, there's a level of like smoothness of operation and what you're looking for in all these different dimensions of smooth operation. And once you can define those, then improves everything, right? The team, the individual,
this is a great place to jump into. You had a specific anecdote or sort of a prototypical story in your essay where a worker, Sarah, I think,
right.
but she's a knowledge worker who's a proxy for the people that you've studied and worked with. And on paper, she can't finish a report. And your suggestion is it isn't the task, it's her personal challenges. So can you expand on, why you put that in and how often you see that, we're not recognizing that it's a real issue at hand?
So often, because our ability to complete a task, I mean, sometimes it's just not enough time, not enough resources, right? Like no one could do it. But then the reason most of the times tasks is not because it's like logically too complicated. It's because logistically there's complications that we're not recognizing. And when we don't recognize where it's hard, then we're deploying all our resources on spinning our wheels in other random directions. So for any task you can think of, even if it's just yourself, a spreadsheet, and you're trying to, wrangle it and then you're getting confused, And okay, maybe you need to get some more training or whatever, but the fact that you don't even recognize that you need to get more training, the fact that you don't recognize that you're getting overwhelmed, and the moment you get overwhelmed, that's an emotional challenge. That's what's causing you to like not think clearly, not realize what questions you have to ask, not realize what you need to look up, not realize where you need to slow down and take more time. Tasks are difficult mostly because of our relationship to the task, right? We think either we can't do it, we're worried about the consequences. I mean, it's hard to think of a task, even the most like terrible programming task that's just so technical. What's hard is that you're frustrated, you think it took way too long than you have, and like the stress is mounting, and it's like learning the patience and the not leaking all this extra stuff around it, right? So that's for tasks that are just very singular tasks, solitary tasks. And most tasks have to do with other people. They have to do with the fact that you didn't communicate it clearly, or you're waiting for someone else that didn't, to finish something, and you don't know how to communicate to chase them. You don't know how to, ask someone for information, tell them that they were wrong. It's.
And I think in the essay, isn't Sarah's sort of personal kryptonite is your phrase is around communication, right? Like she doesn't know how to enroll the different people who are necessary for her to finish this paper. So how does a manager sort of get that sense of somebody's personal kryptonite so that they can help them develop?
Yeah, they need to ask, right? Like what?
That's insane. They need some technology to identify it.
Yeah, they need to sit down, take the time, and be like, do you feel like you have what you need to make the progress? They need to have the trust from the employee that the employee is going to say it to them. Create that space where the employee feels like, having the space, the employee can actually have the, look inside and be like, because I think people know, I think someone like Sarah would know, like actually, if she was given the time, right, with any coach, they'd be like, well, what's actually the problem? That's why coaching rarely, is there anything other than giving them the space to think clearly about themselves that they never had the time to do otherwise, and the safe space to do that. So just allowing that conversation, and also understanding that these tasks are complex. They require relationship management. They require a certain type of conversations. They require a certain type of thinking. They require a certain type of like being willing to like leave this uncertain and make this assertion, and just all these.
And to a certain degree, this kind of comes back to are there learning opportunities? Because, if you're a manager and let's say you've got 80 programmers or whatever, even if, working together, you recognize like, oh, this is a communications and, sort of project management and communications issue, not a hard skills issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't have the time personally as the manager to work with this person as a mentor. I've either got to find somebody who might be, or I've got to have HR has my back and there's an opportunity there either for a bespoke or at least some kind of, library of skills. Be like, hey, let's go and take this course, come back, let's talk about it, something that's not too demanding on time. But you need to have something to say once you've identified the barrier.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think communication skills is like essential, in terms of especially even programming. It's such a team effort. It's so many mistakes come down to them not, communicating clearly. When I teach software engineering, it's like, you guys have to learn to communicate clearly about code and technical issues. It's like just even more important than being way more important than being some ace programmer, especially these days, like, yeah.
Communication and the ability to think critically together is becoming more important, and knowing C or something is becoming less important.
Yeah, absolutely. And being able to understand, like think critically enough to understand what's at the bottom of the issue, and whether if there's a conflict, to understand what are the needs of the different sides. If there's just like, talking at cross purposes, understanding why one person's saying a different thing than someone else, like that clarity of like getting to the bottom of it is what, important. But I think with experience in a particular field, one does get to know like all these are ins and outs, right? Once you know a field very well, the senior people would have, if they just have any sort of level of meta awareness of what they've learned, they would be able to say, oh, like in these situations, these are the subtleties, these are the, things that people might find challenging.
But mentorship is on the decline, if anything, especially as the more senior you get, the less likely you are to be in the office.
Yeah.
And the more people technically roll up to you. And even though the most valuable use of someone's time might vary, like especially at like a senior middle manager, somebody who's, sort of late mid-career, whatever, the one of the best uses of their time could very
Yeah.
well be mentorship.
Yes.
But,
Yes.
this is the most overworked part of the employment pyramid. These are people who just routinely say, like, there is not nearly enough time to do what I'm supposed to do.
Another thing I'm working on is the idea of like a story, like using storytelling and having like a digital sort of repository for each individual organization or even by sector of stories, and this time for the difficulties, right? So all the ways in which this profession or this kind of role is difficult and all the
Hmm.
challenges that come up. And so you can imagine then with that like
But
repository.
this is like the Library of Alexandria for organizational challenge, like
Yeah,
all the
yeah,
institutional
exactly.
knowledge.
Yeah, yeah, and they contribute just once, right? They tell the story, and the amazing thing about AI is that it's not just that it generates, and replaces like, replaces and generates information. It's great at retrieval. So now these like, huge story databases that might be very hard to find the challenge that's relevant for you or find enough examples of stories. You can take real human stories from real people, with exactly what they want to say, with all the nuance and everything, and you can use AI to retrieve what's relevant to a person at a given situation. So then employees can actually just say like, well, right now I'm trying to find a report and these are all the things involved. And then they can get all these stories about all these people that had to like work through challenges and figure out what was difficult and not have to reinvent the wheel. And the manager doesn't have to do anything. They just maybe submitted a story a few times.
That's cool. So that's in process now.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Well, problem solved. All right. So let's wrap up. You've largely answered this, but I want to make sure that we don't miss anything. To close out your essay, you suggest like just go ahead and ask, how can we approach this in a way that feels meaningful to you? And I guess the yes and would be, how do you frame that so it makes sense to someone? Because we don't get that question very often. I could imagine, especially a junior employee coming into a meeting and like, well, how do we make this meaningful to you? Might, uh, I don't know that they'd be ready to answer that question without any more context.
Oh yeah, yes, exactly. That question needs context. I think, yeah. So in terms of the particular role, the particular task, you could give examples of different ways people enjoyed it. Right? This comes back to this kind of story knowledge, like the ability to understand, and this is where the empathy comes in, all the different ways that people can find meaning in this particular task or role. And then it doesn't mean that this employee will feel the same, but it's a jumping off point for that discussion, right? And also being open about the challenges. And I think a big part of these types of conversations in general is the manager themselves being comfortable with their own difficulties. I think that's one of the biggest things for psychological safety, right? If someone's uncomfortable and either they're uncomfortable hearing their employees say something, either because they share that difficulty or they can't stand it when people have that difficulty, or they're just going to start thinking like, oh no, like how am I going to manage this person? If they're just not comfortable with their own discomfort around what the employee might say, that's potentially going to leak out very likely in the conversation. And they're not going to get into this bottom of this very, very not be able to create that psychological safety that's required for the employee to like really, have the space to consider. Having lots of examples, having lists of values, having example values could be connected to the task, just words, and even just a simple values list. People can look at that. It's already completely changes your attention to look at these words like I can increase my sense of autonomy or, ability to connect or whatever it is, just even very vague words, but then there are these underlying principles that drive our motivation to have that. And then just ask the employee, can you see how this would link, in this way? Assuming you didn't have these other stories.
Yeah. And it would be an exercise that a manager maybe should do themselves first. We were
Yes.
talking a little bit about generational shifts over time. And certainly, people, and I might even go so far as to say men of my generation, not sort of weaned on the language of empathy and self-examination. That happened at some point, maybe the 90s, I don't know. Um, and you can imagine a disconnect of a sort between someone in their 20s today who has been steeped in like understand yourself,
Mm.
and somebody 40 years their junior, 30 years their junior, or their senior, not having the internal language necessarily to, or sort of the it might not even really have occurred to them
Yes. Yeah.
to ask these questions. They're not opposed, but like, well, I've never wondered how I felt before. What an intriguing question. Well, Anne, thank you so much. Before we let you go, we'd like to ask a couple of things to close out. And the first is, what's making you happy?
Well, depending on how much time I have, I've started trying to like learn more abstract art. Like I do like normal art off and on, but then to actually do
Yourself, as an artist.
yeah, as an artist, and like to do abstract purely for the process because I'm so outcome oriented, both
Hmm.
in everything in life and in like side projects, and just to try to learn to do something just for the process and not for the outcome. I'm excited to try to rebalance that part of my psyche.
That's a real it's a challenge, and it's so hard to, if someone is outcome oriented versus process oriented, it is very hard to rewire oneself.
Yes, I'm finding it very hard.
Did you paint the paintings behind you?
Yeah, I did. These are just decorations. I have like, these are more like paintings, but
Hmm.
yeah, yeah,
I
but
can't
yeah.
quite
So
see
oh,
the look at you. Where do you find the time?
oh, that was like a few years ago. I haven't had. I mean, like more during like pandemic time. Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating. Good luck with your abstractions. And do you always work in two dimensions? Do you ever do sculpture or?
Well, for my research work, I'm working on augmented reality, so
Mm.
I did a lot of 3D art for that. Yeah, yeah. So there's an immersive resilience training program that combines art and music and storytelling to teach resilience training.
Wow. That sounds cool. I wish we had a bit more time to talk about that next time. I'm sure that Matt would love to have you on again and speak about it. So before we go, apart from developing your abstract art, what else is on your horizon as an academic or a professional?
Yeah, so we're just launching pilots of this workshop, which is, I mean, at the end, I do give the sample of the augmented reality resilience training, but the workshop itself is just normal live online resilience training where it's mapped to a narrative. So the idea is you're going on this hero's journey, and then you're kind of like have your call to adventure and all the ways that you refuse the call. And through this like fun, kind of fun interactive storytelling way, people learn the skills of resilience and emotional well-being, awareness,
Is there a
etc.
montage where people get the team together?
Yeah. What do you mean by
Well,
montage?
I'm
Like,
thinking, in all of the sort of Hollywood adventure stories, there's the reluctant hero. The hero decides, like, okay, well, I'm gonna go and save my father, who's a scientist in the jungle
yeah.
or whatever, and now I'm going to put a team together. And usually, that's sort of
Yeah,
fast-paced montage of like,
I
here's the
see.
demolition expert, and here's the safecracker or whatever.
Yeah. Well, there's not a visual version of that, but there is the assembly of all the resources and skills and inner strengths that you have, and becoming aware of them and harnessing them, and yeah, yeah.
Yeah, awareness is a missing link for a lot of us.
It's having the time. And that's the thing. It's like most of my work is around how to make these like evidence-based emotional training skills, how to make that fun. Because
Hmm.
no one has the time. So to learn something quickly and have it stick, it needs to feel engaging and surprising. And you have to have this like heightened level of attention.
Percent. That was the hardest thing in building professional learning, may be to get across, like, if we don't invest enough to make this fun, and fun can manifest in a lot of different ways. It doesn't need to be John Cleese on camera, but if it's not really really good and human, it can't just be like, well, this is the best information about how
No,
to
no. That's not
learn
going to go
Python. Like,
anywhere.
for just don't spend your money. You're just wasting it.
No,
Uh,
no, 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 exactly, no. And the thing is, like, I think emotional resilience training it is so fun, get to celebrate
yeah, it
all
could
the
be, should be.
things that we care about. It should be fun, and it should be like it's a time to celebrate and curious and explore, get to know ourselves and each other. Yeah.
Well, that sounds great, and I'm also excited to hear more as the stories library progresses. So,
Mm.
thank you so much for your time, and thank you all for joining us.